Coming up, the news goes from bad to worse as we update the Andrew Thomas hamstring injury. So hard to say, it hurts. And also look back at not only what went wrong in this game, what are the solutions for the Giants as we look forward towards Arizona? And is this a New York football fan base divided? We dive in next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast, joined as always by the generational season ticket holder, the healthy, the wealthy, and the wise, Mr. Andrew Makowitz, though never nearly as much after that type of debut on Sunday night.
Absolutely brutal, Adam. The energy at the stadium leading up to everything was so exciting. And then within like 10 minutes, everyone's looking around like, what just happened? And I think everyone in the stadium knew well before halftime that game was not going to go well.
By the way, and I came on obviously after that game. We're going to talk about Monday Night Football and some tie-ins here to the cross stadium brothers of the New York Football Giants, who arguably suffered an even worse loss despite winning over the Buffalo Bills. But that's why Andy wasn't on for the post, the initial one. I know we did it on a Monday, but you need some healing after you sit rain-soaked at the game, just watching this team go down 26-0, watch the team go down 33-0, and just see this thing absolutely get, the soul of Andy, we sometimes say, is the soul of the fan base. It might have been pulled out. He might have been Ghost Rider, just plucked out of his chest, having to sit through that. So we will, I'm sure, get some other notes around your game experience. And maybe at your game experience, you noticed that Andrew Thomas was dealing with a bit of a hamstring problem, battled through it, and came out the other side of it. We're not going to get official final updates on the MRI until Wednesday, but that's what he's going for, an MRI on the hamstring. And at a minimum, we know that this offensive line has a myriad of issues. This now can fall also into the camp of a player potentially in Andrew Thomas who now has a injury history year over year, something that sometimes lingers with him. What's your concern level around the hamstring?
Well, it's high. I mean, we need Andrew Thomas. We talked about how he's one of the most important players on the field for the Giants. He got paid as if he is one of the most important players. He has had an ascension. He is a guy that you kind of put at the left tackle and you think, let's worry about everything else. If he's not there, we'll get into the offensive line in a little bit, but if he's not there, then what do you look at across that offensive line and have any confidence in against any team, never mind a team like Dallas? Keep in mind, Adam, I'm very worried about Andrew Thomas because if this is a lingering issue across the season, the Giants face so many good pass rushing teams, so many good defensive lines coming up, especially in division. They still got 5 more games. They have teams like San Francisco and teams like even the Rams with Aaron Donald. They're all out there on the schedule.
Look good week 1 with their defensive front and pressure, right? I mean, it's across the board.
Oh, yeah, couldn't agree more. And that's the challenge that, the Giants have, is that Andrew Thomas is the one stable piece of this. He is now a big question mark. Obviously, backing him up is Matt Pert, for good, for bad, or for worse. He is also getting an MRI today. So really, the Giants we're already razor thin at the tackle position. Now with these 2 injuries and potentially either one of them missing time, the Giants are going to have to figure something out.
And that's where when we turn our attention, obviously, if you watched the episode yesterday, it was me just being obviously apoplectic around the performance of the offensive line. But now the question is, what's the answer? Remember, whatever Tyree Phillips was or was not, he had played some games for the New York Football Giants last year. He's not on this roster. They let him go to replace him with a young player on the practice squad. Haven't heard anything as of yet around moves that the Giants are going to make. And I didn't necessarily anticipate that because despite, as we'll talk about later, the fan base, they'll do something here, but you can't come out of week 1 and all of a sudden start ringing the alarm bells internally for your organization and say that all these guys are a problem. It's all a disaster. Everyone needs to be replaced, because that would mean that you don't know how to evaluate your own talent because you didn't go and make any key moves in the offseason. Smith Jr. was the best performing offensive lineman, arguably, on Sunday night. But when we talk about the offensive line, and when we talk about by certain metrics, let's say by Pro Football Focus, Glowinski getting a 1 pass blocking grade. What is your solution on the right side of the line with Glowinski and Evan Neal? Because we know it's a problem, but now how would you solve it, internally or outside?
Keep in mind, Adam, that Glowinski won the right guard battle in training camp and in the preseason. So that tells me that the Giants have evaluated that he is the best option that is on the roster for them to win, which in and of its own self is very concerning, right?
Well, okay, so yeah, quick pause because I don't think he did win the right guard spot in camp. I think that Ezeudu didn't show enough development to be able to put him at left guard to have Bredesen play at right guard. Like, and by the way, this is an indictment of the organization. But we didn't hear anything about Glowinski all camp. I don't think it was because steady as he goes, no problems here. I just think that again, they did not have any better options, and it's hard to go get them. It's hard to go get guys, but they were willing to walk into it as the off-season quote big signing. Only big sign they made last year was Glowinski. They're going down with the ship with how poor he looked from last season and now at the start of this year. Go ahead though.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned what are they supposed to do on the right side of the line, and this is the challenge. I just don't think the Giants have the right answers in house, and I think they have to go outside to be able to do it. Remember, they were already razor thin at the offensive tackle position. Now you're having two offensive tackles in Thomas and Pert going to get MRIs, which is not good. So, regardless of how you feel the players played, like could you say it's a one-off for Glowinski going up against the defensive front like the Cowboys? Sure, but you're still going to need reinforcements anyway because Pert is the backup left and right tackle. He's the backup swing tackle on the roster. And so when both of those players are injured, you're going to have to look elsewhere. I think the Giants have to bring in at least one guard and probably one tackle to be able to be in this mix. You obviously have seen some of the different names, like Justin Pugh has kind of thrown his hat in the ring saying he'd like to come back. You see guys, Taylor Lewan and others that have played guard and tackle in the NFL
Mhm.
that are out there. These are all aging veterans that have looked about replacement level, but maybe that's actually what the Giants need is just somebody that is at almost replacement level and not completely screwing the pooch like Mark Glowinski did, where he had a 1 Pro Football Focus rating.
And people talked about this coming out of the game. It wasn't exotic blitz packages. It wasn't crazy stunts from Dallas. It was straight up just going to beat you. And that's what happened on the right side of the line. And it happened across the line at different points in the game, but significantly from that side. And the hard part with the injury to Andrew Thomas, my solution was going to be, at least in the short term, you're going up against Arizona. Mine was going to be, Bredesen, you're playing right guard now. Let's put some stability next to Evan Neal and say, hey, at least then you feel a little bit better because there's a world where Glowinski is actually being a detriment to the growth and development of Evan Neal. Okay, fine. Do that. And then, yes, we're going to take the risk of Ezeudu, who's still coming along, but we trust Andrew Thomas. We know what Andrew Thomas is. Whoops-a-daisy. He may have an injury. He may not be available. And now all of a sudden, you really do open up the floodgates on this line because you mentioned it. Well, Matt Pert, we don't know if he's going to be healthy or not. The other thing that I had talked about with Coach Ed going back to the lead up to this was that inside the Giants organization, they are pretty high on McCathan and what his development can be, and maybe he gets used in a tackle spot. That's not going to fill anybody, myself included, with a lot of confidence saying, well, we'll plug him in if Andrew Thomas is out, right, alongside of Bredesen or Ezeudu, and then you have the rookie at center and whoever at right guard and on down the line you go. That's where, and by the way, Shane Lemieux was not available for game number 1, whatever we think he is or is not as well. So the Giants just have a bevy of, just from an injury standpoint and depth standpoint, a need to do something here. But no matter what you do in the short term over this week, like even if it's a quality player, even if you feel good about the player, are they just going to walk in the door and be ready to go in 5 days for the game against Arizona, right? Like it's shocking that we're here again at the start of this season. It's one game, and I want to give as much, as much of a pass as possible that it only counts for one loss. But that loss was as brutal, and the offensive line performance was as bad as we've ever seen from the Giants in recent memory, with all of the bad offensive lines that they've had.
It's bad, Adam, and you know what? The reason why I'm so pro going outside the building to shore up some of this is no, I don't want to spend money that we don't have from salary cap purposes. The
Right.
whole idea is the most veteran leader of that offensive line is Mark Glowinski at 31 years old, and he is the biggest issue right now across that offensive line. Like, obviously, we want Evan Neal to progress, but Glowinski got bull rushed. He got run around at the guard position. They beat him every single way that a defensive lineman could beat a guard. They did it against Glowinski all in one game. And so for me, if you're going to remove Glowinski from the lineup, you're talking about having a whole offensive line that's 25 and under at that point, which I think you just got to kind of bring in a veteran that says, I know the game a little bit. You know, if I don't want to get Daniel Jones killed, so if I have to take a holding penalty here or there to right the line, I'll do it. I really do think they have to go out and get one of these savvy veterans to help kind of calm everything down with so much youth across the offensive line.
Coming up here in a second, we'll turn our attention to Monday Night Football, where the Jets obviously suffered a devastating loss in Aaron Rodgers, but picked up an amazing divisional win. What did their defense tell us about Big Blue's defense? We'll dive into that here in a moment. So we'll get back into, obviously, the offensive line there coming up here at the back end of this episode. And something about, you mentioned there, about veterans, age, etc., and maybe where this organization currently stands. But Monday Night Football, there's a couple of notes here. First, on the defensive side, that the New York Football Giants, we said in that Sunday Night Football game, okay, it's a 40-0 loss. The offense was apoplectic. The offensive line was terrible. No pressures, no real threat against Dak Prescott. Okay, sometimes average, sometimes subpar against the run. There were bright spots in the second there. I thought Trey Hawkins, I thought Deonte Banks actually played pretty well, but it's a wet, mucky game. You don't get a great sample size of what that looks like. When you go and watch Monday Night Football and see Aaron Rodgers go out after 3 plays and Zach Wilson come in, that defense, which we thought was going to be top 5, top 3, maybe the best in the league, they showed you what it is to be a dominant defense. And everybody, you and I included, thought, look at all the guys on paper for Big Blue. Coming into this year, this defense can be really dynamic. Maybe the Giants should have lost 20-0 instead of 40-0. But I didn't see any of those names step up in significant ways from Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari, even Bobby Okereke, right? You did not find yourself saying, hey, this defense is trying to do everything it can to keep you in this ball game against a decent, albeit dinged up Cowboys offensive line. I said this yesterday. That contrast between the team across the stadium is the difference between where this defensive unit is as well right now by NFL standards.
Yeah, and look, the offense did not play well at all for the Giants. We know that the offensive line wasn't good. Daniel Jones wasn't good. Saquon Barkley, although it's an interception for Jones, he didn't look good with the missed catch for run around 6 points for the Cowboys. The wide receivers were dropping balls. Like, nothing was good about what was going on the offensive side. But the defense didn't do anything to change the game script. Like, we saw that the offensive line was getting beat up. Demarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons and everyone else was getting after Daniel Jones at will. And what you're thinking in your mind is like, man, we need the defense to be able to flip the script here. Get us something different. Change the game up a little bit. And they couldn't do anything. There was no sacks, no interceptions, nothing on Dak Prescott. He had a relatively clean game. There was a couple of key third down plays where the cornerbacks get penalties, one big pass interference penalty against Trey Hawkins. There was no, like, we can flip the script. We're going to take this game over because our offense needs it. It really felt that in all 3 phases of the game, the Giants were significantly worse than the Cowboys. And that is almost more frustrating than anything. Not one unit could create a spark to try to change the game at all.
And not to mention here, because we don't need to belabor the defense. They looked poor. There's a lot of talent there, and we'll see what happens against Arizona. And we're going to get into that as this week progresses. Yeah, guess what? It is a must-win. It's a must-win in week 2 on the road against Arizona if you want to have any chance of maintaining some stability this season. But you mentioned the other phases of this. Last night, the game-winning play came from a rookie punt returner for the New York Jets. Not only has the offensive line coach been maligned here for the Giants, special teams has been maligned here. We get this note coming in today that the Giants are working out Andre Roberts, a 35-year-old wide receiver. I don't know what the agenda is here. Like, this is the first thing that we hear from the Giants in terms of making moves. And it's about maybe Eric Gray shouldn't be the rookie returning for us. That's the takeaway here. Bringing in guys for workouts, and we're bringing in aged special team wide receivers. I am shocked by that, understanding that clearly special teams wasn't good enough with, and by the way, it's the blocked punt against Ezeudu on special teams. So offensive line plaguing different areas beyond just the offensive unit in front of Daniel Jones. And defense as well. It's all phases right now. It's all phases coming out of that game. And I, at least at a minimum, and surprised you're not hearing, let's say, scheduled for a visit offensive lineman, right? Just throw out a name. You don't have to sign the guy, but please don't tell me that your first move was to talk about Andre Roberts coming in for a visit after the performance you had on Sunday.
Yeah. And Adam, to add to that, James Prochet is another wide receiver return man specialist who also is in the building today. And yeah, while the Giants should be scouring the league to get better overall, it is
Anywhere
just
you can.
concerning as a fan that we haven't heard anything about the offensive line when we check the list of things that I worry about most from that game. Punt returning and kick returning was probably very low on the list, and offensive line is at as high as you can get it. And we had 2 injuries to that offensive line. So for me, it just seems strange that we're not calling for trades. We're not bringing people in on the offensive line on Tuesday to say, can you get in this building and maybe be a part of the team come Saturday, Sunday? So I'm with you. I'm not going to overreact, but at the same time, it would be nice to see a little offensive line help. Just like you said, throw me a name. Throw me a bone, Adam. That's all I want.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't have to be real. It can be just a bit of a fluff piece. Just throw out some names. Say, yes, the Giants have talked with Justin Pugh potentially about coming for visit. Who, by the way, I know you mentioned him earlier. He said this in the offseason when he was asked about it. This is always, by the way, what players who are looking for work do. They name teams that they've either played for before. They think they have some holes on the offensive line. They say, they love a reunion. But this had already been a possibility. And certainly we'll keep an eye on what the Giants do. The other thing, too, is how much room do the Giants have to be able to operate, right? What does the cap space look like for the Giants? And we mentioned how they never did anything with Leonard Williams because they want that money to come off the books at the end of the year, and they don't want to have dead cap or any other things. They don't want to kick the can down the road with him. I don't know how you get to that place of helping to solve positions of need without looking at the roster and looking at contracts and saying, where can we trim some fat? Where can we save some money? Next up, though, we're going to use Daniel Jones as the tip of the iceberg for a discussion that has happened ever since he was drafted and really came up to a head after that Sunday night loss. A Giants fan base that seems to be having 2 very different perspectives about where this team is. So the one question I'll ask you here, which I think really tips things off, Andy. Daniel Jones did a couple things in that game. Let's be very clear. What a hero. Stayed out there and got bludgeoned down after down. And I think that was as much him as it was Brian Daboll, because I think Daniel Jones was like, I need to salvage something from this, right? I need this team to do something. Now, once you start playing your backup offensive lineman, I think we can make different decisions here, but that's okay. Early in the game, he rolls out to the sideline and has the rookie season play. As he's drifting out of bounds, he whips one towards Darren Waller's ankles, and it gets picked off. Ugly play. We understand it was a messy game. And then another one would be, and this isn't really about Daniel Jones, but it's about the way the fan base reacted to it. Jalen Hyatt finally gets in the game, over the middle, drops the pass. What a nice little moment it could have been. When you go back and watch it, the ball was behind him. It was a bad throw, and he should have caught it. That right there is the lightning rod thing that starts sending off this fan base, because if you don't believe in Daniel Jones and you don't think they should have given him the contract, it's look at that terrible throw, look at the bad interception, etc. Or you say, well, Jalen Hyatt had to catch that thing. Was it a mistake from the organization? Decisions being made, etc. This is where we're going to finish the rest of this conversation. But do you feel that? Have you noticed that like the Giants fan base is very much, after this one game, they're getting right back into their old habits of like, it's either you are all in or you are all out on what this organization has done. Honeymoon officially over for Joe Schoen.
It does feel very binary online, like whether you are either like, we want Daniel Jones as our quarterback or we don't want him. And every single thing that happens over the course of the game will decide whether or not he should be here or he shouldn't. And I absolutely see that you're seeing the same things as me. It's like, you can look at the same play from 12 different angles and people have vastly different opinions on who's responsible or where the blame falls and why, things are the way that they are, Adam, you could not be more correct. It feels like there is still a section of the fan base that is thinking about the contract that Daniel Jones signed, how it was a mistake, and every mistake along the way should be attributed to him, because if you had a top 10 type of quarterback, they could get us out of all of these messes that the Giants continually find themselves in. And then there's the other faction which says Daniel Jones had no time to throw the ball. He had less than 2 seconds. He was pressured or sacked on 77% of his dropbacks. Like, there were multiple drops in the game by wide receivers. Like, what is he supposed to do if this is what they're putting around him to even give him an opportunity to throw the ball? And it just feels like those are the two complete opposite sides of the spectrum, and there's no middle ground for anyone, to be objective about how both can be problems.
And I thought that it was very strange to me as well that when talking about the drop back timing for Daniel Jones, you can also parse that down and put it into on the dropbacks when he had time. How much time did he have, right? Over 3 seconds. If you take away all the plays when he didn't have half a second, right? Like, so you can parse it down even deeper and say, and then look at how he performed when he did have time. But we all know, like, that's relative to the game and what's happening, the pressure that a quarterback is under. But the other thing about this, and you mentioned the Daniel Jones contract, and that's still being divisive. And I had respectful conversations in a lot of different Twitter spaces. So this isn't a knock on anybody. I think it's good to have different opinions about this. But I didn't realize that there's a large segment that came back to it and said, everything that you did this offseason was indicative that you wanted to compete now, deep playoff run. This next 2-year window is a win now mode by all of the decisions you made this offseason. And I was just surprised by that because, yes, you gave the contract to Daniel Jones, but it's out after 2 years. You did give up draft capital to get Darren Waller. Again, it's out after 2 years. You wanted to give Saquon Barkley a 2-year deal, ended up being the tag. Yes, you extended Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, because they are going to be cornerstones no matter what. You need good players and you need to pay them. You didn't give Xavier McKinney an extension this offseason. You brought in Paris Campbell for pennies on the dollar. The only big expenditure, because it's the only money you had, was Bobby Okereke. And I believe that the team wants to take this step forward. I think the frustration for the fan base is that, and this was every team does, by the way, Joe Schoen and the Giants said, wow, kind of surprised ourselves last season. Made the playoffs, won a playoff game. That's great. And we want to build off of that. Also, we know that we have a lot of things to fix. The most glaring identification to me is the offensive line and not having that shored up. But I was never under the impression that the Giants were going, all in on these next couple of seasons. They didn't go get a number 1 wide receiver at any cost. They didn't go sign the highest valued offensive lineman available on the market or make big trades. This is what the Jets should have done in front of Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he'd still be upright and on the field, right? But I mean, did that surprise you? Because I didn't know that faction existed that looked at this as being a critical moment in the franchise's history coming into this season.
It is bizarre, Adam, because the Giants have told you that they're not pushing all their chips in the center, saying it's this year or bust. And you mentioned a few reasons why. One perfectly good answer is they didn't. DeAndre Hopkins was a free agent available to go anywhere he wanted. Said he called the Giants. The Giants never called him back. Like, you'd think if you were going all in, you'd bring DeAndre Hopkins in and say, we're going to pay him whatever he wants because we need a number 1 wide receiver, because right now, this moment is the most important for our team. They didn't do that. They also, Adam, the contracts that they gave out were to guys that are 25 and 26 years old. You're talking about guys like Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas, who are going to be here for quite a while. You're talking about a guy like Daniel Jones, who they think is going to be the future at the quarterback position. And guess what they have not done, Adam? They haven't restructured Leonard Williams' contract. They haven't looked to get money for this season from a Dory Jackson on the cap. They haven't done these moves that in a vacuum would say they're trying to win right now. What Joe Schoen is saying is, yes, we had a good season. Yes, we're trying to build upon that. We have all these in case of emergency break glass things. We're not at that point yet. If we were, we would have a 35-year-old number 1 wide receiver on the roster. We would have taken all this money and put our chips in on the offensive line. He's still looking to build. And I am surprised that people are so upset with where things are when all the big signings that they had are all young players that you expect to be here for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years down the road.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a Dory Jackson in there as well. The decision that we're excited about, Deonte Banks, him being a starter, he's a first round draft pick. You expect that, but even Trey Hawkins flashing like that, the fact that there's the opportunity for both of these players to be in the starting rotation for the secondary is also indicative of it, right? And Dory Jackson's money comes off the books this year. You don't, you can make the adjustment after this season, obviously, at a couple of key positions, but if you think that you're pot committed on it over not just this, but also years ahead, then you are looking at a Dory Jackson and you're looking at Leonard Williams, one way or the other, and you're making decisions. And again, this is the part that I totally get. This is where you say, hey, Joe Schoen, we will have some questions here for you when we look back and think about the offensive line not being fixed. And that doesn't even need to be Evan Neal. He's a draft pick, a high draft pick. You live with that. But Joe Schoen has very much been a guy, hey, if you're not cutting it, and Brian Daboll's the same way, right? Best player is going to win the role. Well, what is Glowinski doing on this team, right? He was average at best last year. It was a mistake. Go solve that problem. If you believe in Bredesen, fine, but at least one more piece needed to be added here. And then you talk about the depth as well. It's just odd to me that they didn't go and address that area, especially if you think you're in win now mode. Then you are pot committed on it. If you think it's going to take maybe a couple of years, you'll go back to the draft year over year, add in more pieces on that line, and continue to evaluate and see which guys are going to get long-term deals and which guys will get rotated out.
The biggest concern that I have, Adam, is they have allocated resources and capital at the offensive line, and it doesn't look
Yes.
any better. That's the real concern. Andrew Thomas looks great when he's healthy. Hopefully his hamstring is okay. They spent a first round pick on him. They also spent a first round pick on Evan Neal. They went out and spent a second round pick on a center, Adam. We always talk about like how far is too far, early on to be able to draft a center. They went and did that. Joe Schoen's first order of business, his first contract he gave out on a multi-year deal was to Mark Glowinski, who looks like he's arguably one of the worst starting guards right now. They went out and got drafted Joshua Ezeudu, who can't beat out Mark Glowinski for a starting role. Right. That was a third round draft pick, Adam. There are starting to be questions about either A, is it talent evaluation that we're not understanding properly what we need from the offensive line? Remember, Andrew Thomas was drafted by a different regime. And B, the second thing is it coaching? Is it the offensive line coaches not being able to bring these players along, primarily Bobby Johnson, as you mentioned? What is the challenge here? Like, think about all the things I just laid out for you. None of those players have gotten better. We know John Michael Schmitz is a rookie. This is week one. But, like, there are some serious concerns. They have put money and draft capital behind the offensive line, Adam. And Sunday night, it did not show. It looked like that was a hodgepodge of guys that had never played a snap together, looking around trying to figure out what is going on.
And that's the biggest concern here, that from year one to year two, with Joe Schoen and with this coaching staff, whether you didn't coach them up correctly to the point where they'd be ready to play, or that you didn't identify that they weren't good enough to be able to play, right? Because as much as we like the signing of Bobby Okereke, I'll tell you, fine, start Micah McFadden and give me a better offensive lineman than Mark Glowinski, right? Like, you have to allocate your money accordingly, and we understand. And this is again, just at a high level. And at the end of the day, ultimately, this to me and to you and I think, has always been another step in the progressive direction. But by no means are the Giants on step 7 of 10. They're on step 3 of 10, right? This is still a big process. There was a lot of bad money on the books off of Dave Gettleman. And you also mentioned there, Andrew Thomas was a Dave Gettleman guy. So as it stands right now, the signings for Joe Schoen and draft picks are question mark in Evan Neal at right tackle, miss at Glowinski at right guard, and we think, I thought it was a good rookie debut for Schmitz Jr. with everything considered around him on that line, but that's a question mark. And you mentioned Ezeudu as well, right? So there are questions now about results, and that's why the evaluation process is over multiple seasons. So I think that this loss, and we are cutting it off here on a Tuesday and moving forward to Arizona, but I think this loss at this level and scale, I get why it bubbled up the rawest possible reaction and emotions from whatever faction of the Giants fan base that you were in, because nobody, and I said this on Monday, I thought, hey, I could still feel good coming out of a loss to the Cowboys. I didn't mean 40-0 shutout at home, right? Like this is far and away the most shocking result that you could have seen on Sunday Night Football, and why it makes these next couple of days very interesting to see how Joe Schoen and the Giants operate.
Yeah, Adam, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, the reason why this is hitting a nerve with Giant fans is because we saw what happened in the playoff game against the Philadelphia Eagles, where we were outclassed and outmatched, and we
Yep.
went and reloaded and got all these different parts, and we're very excited. Most people consider the Cowboys kind of tier two of the Super Bowl teams in the NFC, right below teams like the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers. And if we're still putting up 40-0 at home,
Yep.
defeatist mentality play on the field, it just makes you wonder how far we are really away from competing, as opposed to just being in every game with middling teams and hoping that we get W's.
100%. So as we say, we'll go through this week. We'll get an update on Andrew Thomas. That's going to be critical because, frankly, if he's going to be out for any amount of time, it really becomes kind of a disaster that it's going to be hard to correct. You're not going to be able to go and replace 3/5 of an offensive line on the fly in between weeks 1, 2, and 3. So we'll see what the news we get on him. We'll obviously also update any other players that are being brought in. Apparently, wide receiver is a big area of focus for the New York Football Giants. Later in the week, we're going to update our in-season random pick battle, our primary pick battle. We're also going to look ahead to Arizona. What are the key matchups there? Listen, we may think that they're a bum team, but guess what? We are, after week 1, the worst team in the NFL. And you can't get better until you go out and prove that you're better than somebody else. You get us over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast. You get us over on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht, at AndyMac214, and at One Giant Podcast. We're having a lot of fun ramping back up. We got a comment, Andy, ahead of the season saying, not as much content in the offseason as last year. Are you guys going to be ramping up? Well, look, here we are. We're ramping up. We are as ramped up as we could be. And it's fun because we're trying to do things a little more in depth, talking about technique and how guys are playing on the field, game to game, key plays, critical matchups. So enjoy all of that as we continue to progress towards that road game against Arizona and what is a must win. Until next time, though, friends. Until next time. As Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.